I rented a small lake house for a week at the end of summer. It was supposed to be a break from everything: work, noise, people. The listing showed quiet photos of a wooden cabin on the edge of a still lake, surrounded by tall pine trees. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. I booked it without thinking twice. I packed some clothes, food, a flashlight, a few tools, and drove out early one morning before sunrise. The drive was long, and the roads got narrower the closer I got to the lake. By the time I turned off the main road, it was all dirt and gravel, twisting through miles of forest. I didn't see another car the entire time. When I finally came out of the trees, the lake appeared suddenly, flat and gray under a pale sky. The house sat close to the water, smaller than it looked in the photos, with chipped paint and a sagging porch. There was a small dock behind it, a metal rowboat tied to one of the posts, and a path that disappeared into the woods. The air smelled like wet earth and pine needles. Everything was quiet except for the faint buzzing of insects and the sound of water hitting the dock. The silence was heavy, almost too much. I unloaded my bags and went inside. The house was simple: wood floors, a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a short hallway that led to a back door facing the lake. Dust coated everything. The windows were streaked with dirt. A single old ceiling fan hung motionless above the living room. I spent the first few hours cleaning. There was an old smell like damp wood that never fully dried. The bathroom sink dripped constantly. The floorboards near the back door were soft, probably from years of moisture. Still, the place had a strange calm to it. I ate a quick meal, opened a few windows, and sat out on the porch to watch the lake. The water didn't move much, not even with wind. It was the stillest water I'd ever seen. The forest on the opposite shore looked endless. A wall of trees so thick it was impossible to see past them. I remember thinking how isolated it felt, how far from everything. That first night, I lay in bed listening to the lake. The window was open, and I could hear faint noises. Water slapping against wood, a distant creak from the dock, maybe a branch snapping somewhere in the dark. I told myself it was normal, just the sounds of nature. Still, something about the rhythm of it bothered me. The creaks weren't random. They came and went like footsteps, slow, uneven, as if someone were walking back and forth at the end of the dock. When I woke up the next morning, I checked the dock. The boards were wet, darker than the rest, as if someone had walked there during the night. The water was calm again, reflecting the trees like a mirror. I tried to ignore it, told myself the wood probably swelled overnight from humidity. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the fog lift off the lake. Around noon, I decided to take the rowboat out. The rope holding it was old and frayed, but it still held. I pushed off from the dock and started rowing toward the center of the lake. The air was cool, but the sun was bright. The water was dark, so dark I couldn't see more than a few inches below the surface. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the soft splash of the oars. I stopped halfway across and let the boat drift. The lake was completely still, like glass. That's when I noticed something just below the surface, maybe 20 feet away. It looked like a shape, not solid, more like a shadow or a dark patch under the water. I stared at it for a while, thinking it was a rock or a log, but it wasn't shaped like either. It was long, uneven, and it moved slightly slow, like it was swaying underwater. The air felt colder suddenly. I started rowing back, trying not to look down. When I reached the dock, I tied the boat and went inside without looking back at the water. I couldn't explain it, but something about that shape bothered me. It didn't feel natural. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening again to the sounds outside. The water moved differently, slapping harder against the dock. I heard a faint splash, then a dragging noise, something scraping wood, slow and heavy, then silence. After a while, I convinced myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or something, and tried to sleep. In the morning, I went outside and froze. The boat was gone. The rope was still tied to the dock, but the end had been cut clean, not frayed. I walked down the dock slowly, scanning the water. The surface looked undisturbed. No ripples, no sign of anything. I stood there a long time, feeling the boards move gently under my feet, the cold air crawling over the water. I spent the rest of that day inside, not doing much of anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every so often, I thought I saw movement out on the lake. Just small disturbances, like something breaking the surface then sinking again. When night came, I turned off all the lights and sat by the window facing the lake. The moonlight made the water look metallic, pale and flat. Around midnight, I saw movement at the edge of the dock. Just a flicker of something, small and quick. It looked like a ripple starting from the shore, spreading slowly outward. Then it stopped. I didn't move for almost an hour, staring at the same spot. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the back porch. Bare feet, small. The prints started at the edge of the dock, went across the porch and stopped at the back door. There weren't any leading away. I felt my chest tighten as I stood there staring at them. The mud was still damp. I didn't know what to do. I walked around the property, checking the trees, the shoreline, everywhere. There was no one. I didn't see another footprint, not even animal tracks. I sat in my car for a while, debating whether to leave, but I stayed. I told myself I was overreacting, that someone from a nearby cabin, if there even was one, must have wandered over. That night it rained. The sound of it hitting the roof made it harder to tell what else I was hearing. I stayed in bed with my flashlight in my hand. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a dull thump from outside, then another closer, the sound of something heavy hitting the porch. I sat up, listening, barely breathing. After a long pause, I heard the soft creak of the porch boards, slow, steady. I didn't move. The rain muffled everything, but I could hear the weight of each step. Then silence. When I got up in the morning, the rain had stopped. Everything was slick with water. The footprints were gone, washed away, but near the edge of the dock, I noticed something dark tangled between the planks. I knelt down and pulled it free. It was a piece of fabric, soaked and heavy, torn from what looked like an old jacket. The fabric smelled foul, like something that had been underwater too long. I packed my bags right after that. I couldn't stay another night. As I loaded my things into the car, I kept glancing at the lake. It looked calm again, still and blank. When I walked down the path to take one last look, I noticed something floating far from the dock. It was small, barely visible, maybe just a piece of wood. But as I stared longer, I realized it was the rowboat. It drifted slowly, moving in circles like it was caught in a gentle current. The oars were gone. I didn't go down to the dock. I got in the car and drove away, the gravel crunching under the tires louder than anything else I'd heard all week. The forest felt endless on the way out, the trees leaning in close, blocking out the light. When I finally reached the highway, I didn't look back. A few days after I got home, I tried to look up the lake out of curiosity. I found an old article about a man who had gone missing there years ago. They found his boat drifting with his jacket caught on the dock. They said he'd probably fallen in and drowned, though his body was never recovered. That night, I dreamed of the lake again. I saw the same still water, the same gray sky, and that same shadow moving slowly beneath the surface, swaying, waiting, just below where the light could reach. When I woke up, I could still feel the smell of damp wood in my nose, and for a moment, I thought I heard the soft sound of water slapping against a dock that wasn't there anymore. It was late September when I decided to spend a few days alone at a lake house that my cousin had bought earlier that year. It sat at the edge of a small lake surrounded by thick pine forest, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. He had told me it needed a lot of work. Old floors, cracked walls, broken fixtures, but I didn't care. I just wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere away from work, noise, and people. I drove out there on a Friday morning with a few bags of groceries, some old clothes, and a small toolbox in the back of my car. The last few miles of the drive were rough, the road narrowing into a single dirt path that twisted through the trees. I didn't see another car the entire way. The woods were dense and almost too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy. When I finally reached the lake, the house came into view through the trees. A small, weathered place with a slanted roof and faded blue paint peeling off the wooden siding. It looked like it had been sitting there for decades without much care. I parked near the front steps and got out. The first thing I noticed was how still everything was. The lake's surface was flat like glass, barely a ripple. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. There were no birds, no wind, just a constant hum of insects somewhere far off. The house looked smaller up close, its windows dark and reflective, the porch steps soft under my feet. Inside, the air was stale, like it hadn't been opened in a long time. Dust covered everything, tables, the counters, the windowsills. There were only 2 rooms downstairs. A living area with an old couch and a small kitchen in the corner, and a bedroom toward the back. A narrow staircase led up to a small loft with another bed and a view of the lake through a single window. The floor creaked with every step. I unpacked my things, opened a few windows to let in fresh air, and started cleaning. Most of the day went by quietly. I swept the floor, wiped down the counters, and checked the plumbing, which surprisingly still worked. The house felt old but solid enough. By the time the sun started to set, I was tired and sore. The sky turned orange over the trees, and the lake reflected the color so perfectly it looked like it was glowing. That first night, I sat out on the porch with a flashlight and a beer, listening to the water lap against the small dock. It was peaceful at first, but the quiet started to get to me. There was something about that kind of silence that made small sounds seem sharper. The crack of a branch, the splash of a fish, the rustle of leaves somewhere beyond the trees. Every sound seemed closer than it really was. When I went inside later, the house felt colder. The air seemed heavier, damp somehow. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and lay down on the old bed in the back room. It took me a long time to fall asleep. I woke up several times during the night, unsure why. Once, I could have sworn I heard a slow scraping sound outside, like metal dragging across wood. I told myself it was just tree branches in the wind, though I didn't remember hearing any wind at all. The next morning, I walked down to the lake. There was a small wooden rowboat tied to the dock. The rope was frayed, but it still held. The boat had water inside it, so I bailed it out with an old plastic bucket. When I looked up at the tree line on the opposite shore, I thought I saw something dark moving there. Maybe a deer or someone walking, but when I blinked, it was gone. I spent the day trying to fix up little things around the house. Tightening hinges, checking the fuse box, cleaning the porch steps. In the afternoon, clouds rolled in from the west, turning the water gray. The wind picked up and made the trees sway. The house groaned softly as if it were settling deeper into the ground. By nightfall, rain started to fall hard. I stayed inside, reading an old magazine I found in a drawer, but I couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes I'd hear something. Footsteps maybe, or just water dripping from the roof, but it made me uneasy. Around midnight, when I went to check the windows, I noticed muddy footprints on the porch, small ones, bare feet. They led up to the front door, stopped there, then turned back toward the lake. I stood there for a long time staring at them, trying to convince myself I had tracked mud in earlier, but the prints were too small and too fresh. I locked the door again, checked the back door twice, and went upstairs to the loft to sleep, thinking I'd feel safer higher up. But I barely slept at all. Every sound outside made my chest tighten. The creak of the dock, the soft tapping against the wall, the faint splash near the shore. When I finally got out of bed the next morning, the sky was pale gray. The footprints were gone, washed away by the rain, but the feeling stayed with me. I walked the property, checking the trees, the edge of the lake, even the road, but found nothing. I didn't see another person. Still, the thought of someone walking barefoot out there in the dark made my stomach turn. That afternoon, I took the boat out onto the lake, trying to clear my head. The water was cold and the air still. The forest around the lake felt endless. I rowed toward the middle, then stopped and let the boat drift. That's when I noticed a small shape in the water about 20 feet away. At first, I thought it was a log, but as I got closer, I saw it was a plastic bag floating just below the surface. When I reached out with the oar, the bag tore, and something heavy sank quickly beneath the water. It happened too fast for me to see what it was, but I caught a glimpse of fabric. Dark, thick, maybe part of a jacket. I rowed back to the dock immediately, heart pounding. I didn't look back. The air felt colder than before, and the clouds were closing in again. By the time I got inside, it was raining hard. I sat at the kitchen table trying to calm myself down, telling myself it was probably just trash, maybe something that fell off a boat. But the lake didn't have any boats except the one tied to my dock. That night, I couldn't sit still. I checked all the windows again. Around midnight, I thought I saw light flickering near the trees across the lake, faint but moving, like someone walking with a flashlight. The rain made it hard to see, and the glass fogged up fast, but I was sure it wasn't lightning. I turned off all my lights and watched. The light moved slowly, then disappeared completely. I waited another hour, but it never came back. The following morning, I decided I'd leave. The place didn't feel safe anymore. I packed my bags and loaded everything into the car. Before I left, I went down to the dock one last time. The boat was gone. The rope that had tied it to the post was cut clean, not frayed or torn. Cut, like with a knife. I stared at the water for a long time, feeling that heavy silence again. The road back out of the woods felt longer than before. Every turn seemed unfamiliar. At one point, I had to stop the car because a large branch had fallen across the path. It looked fresh, like it had been broken only minutes earlier. When I got out to move it, I noticed muddy footprints near the side of the road, the same size and shape as the ones I saw on the porch. They led off into the trees and vanished. I didn't stop again after that. I drove straight back to town and didn't tell anyone about what happened. A week later, my cousin called to say someone had broken into the lake house. The police found the back door open, muddy footprints on the floor, and wet clothes piled near the porch. They said it looked like someone had been living in the woods nearby for a long time. After that, I never went back. Sometimes I still think about that place, about the footprints, the floating bag, the light across the lake. I try to tell myself it was just some stranger passing through, maybe a squatter or someone hiding out. But I can't shake the thought of how quiet the lake was, how empty it looked, and how whoever was out there never made a sound. Every now and then, I'll wake up at night and hear that same soft scraping sound, like something dragging against wood. It always takes me a few seconds to remember I'm not there anymore. But the sound doesn't stop right away. It fades slowly, like it's coming from far across the water. It was supposed to be a quiet week at the lake house. I had been working nonstop for months, and when my friend offered to let me stay at his family's cabin by Lake Wren, I didn't think twice. I packed food, clothes, a few tools, and left early on a Monday morning. The drive took 4 hours, most of it through flat countryside, then into the woods. The last stretch was a long, twisting dirt road, so narrow the branches brushed against the car windows. I hadn't seen another vehicle for miles. When I finally reached the lake, the air felt colder, damp, like the ground never really dried. The house sat right near the waterline, built on old wooden posts, with a small dock stretching out into the lake. The place was simple: 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, and wide windows facing the water. The paint on the walls had started to peel, the porch railings leaned a little, and the dock planks were gray and warped from years of rain. It felt forgotten, the kind of place that looked peaceful but lonely at the same time. I carried my bags inside and opened a few windows to get rid of the stale smell. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No voices, no distant cars, not even the sound of birds. Just the faint lapping of the lake against the dock. The silence had weight to it. It made me feel like I shouldn't make noise, like I was intruding. I spent most of that first day unpacking and getting used to the place. The kitchen still worked, though the fridge made a low buzzing sound that never stopped. The floor creaked with every step, and there were faint stains on the wooden boards that looked like water damage. In the main room, an old armchair sat by the window facing the lake, the fabric worn thin at the edges. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, like something out of a quiet retirement story. I walked down to the dock before sunset. The water looked dark and still, almost like oil. The trees on the opposite shore were thick, forming a solid wall of green. I dipped my hand in the water. It was ice cold, colder than it should have been for late summer. I stayed there until the light faded and the first crickets started buzzing. When I went back inside, I locked the doors even though there wasn't another house for miles. That night, I couldn't sleep well. The air inside felt heavy, and the sound of the fridge buzz seemed louder in the dark. Around midnight, I thought I heard something outside, a faint thud from near the dock, followed by a slow creaking sound, like a board shifting under weight. I tried to tell myself it was just the wood swelling from the humidity, but it didn't sound random. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, careful steps, then silence. In the morning, I went down to the dock again. Everything looked the same except for one thing, a small wet footprint on the planks near the edge. It was faint but fresh, shaped like a bare foot, smaller than mine. I stared at it for a while, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't gone outside after dark, and it hadn't rained during the night. The ground around the dock was muddy, but I didn't see any other prints leading up to it. Just that one mark, right at the edge, like someone had stepped up from the water and then stopped. The next few days were uneventful, though the quiet started to wear on me. The lake had this way of looking different every hour, sometimes still and silver, sometimes almost black, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Every evening, I'd sit by the window and watch it until the sky turned gray. That's when I'd start hearing small noises again, soft knocks, the creak of wood, sometimes the faint sound of water moving near the dock even when the air was perfectly still. By the fourth night, I started keeping a flashlight beside my bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The air felt colder than usual, and there was a faint sound, something scraping softly against the outside wall. I froze, listening. The sound was steady, like someone dragging a branch or a stick slowly along the siding. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, I heard a quiet splash from the direction of the lake. I waited a long time before I could fall asleep again. When I went outside in the morning, I saw what had made the scraping sound. Along the back wall of the house, there were long streaks in the dust and dirt that had built up on the siding, like something or someone had run their hand along it. The ground below the marks was damp, like water had dripped there recently. I looked toward the lake, but there was nothing. The surface was flat, smooth, untouched. That afternoon, I decided to take the small rowboat out onto the water. It was tied loosely to the dock, the rope stiff from old knots. I rowed toward the middle of the lake where the water was deepest, just to get away from the uneasy feeling that the house had started giving me. From out there, the house looked small, like it didn't belong. The windows were black squares, empty. I sat there drifting for a while, not thinking much of anything, until I noticed something below the surface. It looked like a pale shape, far down, maybe just a rock or a log, but it was too smooth. The water distorted it, made it hard to see clearly. I leaned closer and saw what looked like fabric fluttering faintly, caught on something. It might have been an old piece of clothing, but the longer I stared, the more it looked like a sleeve. A jacket maybe, just barely visible through the shifting water. I pulled the oar back quickly, the boat rocking as I turned it around. I didn't look down again. My hands shook as I rowed back to the dock, my stomach twisting. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just trash or an old tarp someone had lost. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something about the stillness of that water that didn't feel right, like it was hiding something heavy. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound made me sit up and listen. The ticking of the fridge, the creak of the floor, the faint lap of water against the dock. Around 3 a.m., I heard something hit the side of the house. Not loud, just a single, dull thud, like something solid had been thrown or dropped against the wall. Then came another, closer this time, near the window. I lay there staring at the ceiling, afraid to move. Eventually the sound stopped, but I didn't sleep again until dawn. When I went outside in the morning, I found muddy handprints on the wall below the window. Small, wet, the same size as the footprint from the dock. The ground below them was soft and disturbed, like someone had stood there for a long time. I walked around the house slowly, scanning the woods, the dock, the edge of the lake. I saw nothing. No footprints leading away. No movement in the trees, just stillness. That was the moment I decided I was done. I packed my bags in silence, loaded the car, and took one last look at the lake before leaving. It looked calm again, almost peaceful, as if nothing had ever happened. But when I looked at the dock, I noticed the rowboat was gone. The rope that had tied it was still there, frayed but not broken, cut clean. The drive back felt endless. The dirt road seemed longer, and the forest felt thicker, darker. When I finally reached the paved highway, I didn't look back. I told myself I'd tell my friend about what I'd seen, but I never did. There was nothing to explain that didn't sound insane. 2 weeks later, I read a short article online about Lake Wren. It said a man had gone missing from a campsite near the southern edge of the lake. His kayak was found drifting empty near the middle, and police divers had searched the area but found nothing. The report mentioned that the same lake had been the site of several drownings over the years, all in roughly the same area. They called it an accident-prone body of water. Nothing more. I never went back there, but I still think about that shape under the surface, that faint outline drifting just below reach. I think about the wet footprints on the dock, the cut rope, and the handprints on the wall. I know what the police called accidents, but I can't stop picturing how cold that water was, how quiet the lake had been, and how something in it had moved when I thought it was completely still. It was the end of August when I rented a small lake house for a week. I had been working too much, barely sleeping, and needed a break from everything. The photos online showed a quiet wooden house right by the water, surrounded by pine trees, with a small dock stretching out into a calm lake. It looked perfect, isolated, peaceful, and cheap. I didn't think much about why it was so cheap. I just booked it and packed my things the next morning. The drive there was long, almost 5 hours. The last stretch was a winding dirt road that seemed to go on forever, curving through dense woods where the trees pressed close to both sides of the car. My GPS stopped working halfway down the road, so I had to rely on a printed map the owner had emailed me. By the time I reached the lake, the sun was already sinking behind the trees, and everything was washed in orange light. The lake was still and quiet, so still it looked like glass. The air smelled damp, like wet wood and moss. The house sat right near the edge of the water, old but sturdy, its faded green paint peeling off the walls. There was a narrow gravel driveway leading up to it and a single rowboat tied to the dock. I didn't see another house or car anywhere around. When I stepped out of the car, the silence hit me. No wind, no birds, no insects, just a heavy kind of quiet that felt unnatural. I stood there for a minute, listening, and the only thing I could hear was the faint sound of water touching the dock. Inside, the house was small but decent. The air smelled like dust and wood that had soaked up years of moisture. The living room had a small couch, a coffee table, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in a long time. The kitchen was clean but old, metal sink, tiny stove, a fridge that hummed constantly. Upstairs, there was one bedroom with a view of the lake. The floorboards creaked with every step. I unpacked, opened a few windows to let air in, and sat on the porch as the light faded. The lake looked beautiful at night, dark and flat with the reflection of the moon stretching across it. The woods on the far side looked like a solid black wall. I stayed out there for a while, just listening to the soft movements of water. That first night was quiet, but something about the stillness made it hard to sleep. I could hear every sound, the ticking of the fridge, the faint creak of wood, and every now and then a distant splash out on the lake. It wasn't loud, just soft enough to keep me awake. It sounded like something dropping into the water, then silence. I told myself it was fish jumping or maybe branches falling. Still, I kept the lights on until almost 2 a.m. The next morning, I went down to the dock. The boards were damp and slick. The rowboat was still there, tied loosely to one of the posts. The rope was frayed and looked like it had been tied and untied 1,000 times. When I looked down into the water, I couldn't see more than a few feet before it turned completely black. Felt bottomless. I decided to take a walk around the property. The woods behind the house were thick and went uphill fast. The ground was soft and covered in dead leaves. There were no trails, just scattered rocks and roots sticking up everywhere. I walked maybe 100 yards before turning back. The air back there felt colder, heavier, like it was holding its breath. When I got back to the house, I noticed something strange on the dock.
Wet footprints.
Small, bare feet, maybe a few hours old. They led from the edge of the dock up to the porch steps, then stopped. I froze for a second, looking around, but there was no one in sight. I checked inside the house. Nothing. The floors were dry. I told myself it was probably my own prints from earlier, even though I hadn't taken my shoes off. That night, the noises started again. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of wood creaking. It was slow and deliberate, like footsteps moving across the porch outside. Then it stopped. The silence after that felt worse than the sound itself. I waited, listening. A few minutes later, I heard a splash from the lake, louder this time. I got up and looked out the window, but everything was pitch black. The water barely moved. I stayed awake until morning, staring at the ceiling. The next day, I noticed something new. The rowboat was no longer tied to the dock. The rope hung loose, cut clean. The boat was gone. The lake was flat and empty. My stomach sank as I stood there staring at the spot where it had been. I couldn't figure out how it happened. There hadn't been any wind or storms, and the rope wasn't torn or frayed. It had been cut with something sharp. I spent the rest of that day inside, keeping busy, fixing loose boards, cleaning the kitchen, anything to keep from thinking. But every time I looked out the window, I caught myself scanning the lake. Late in the afternoon, I saw something floating near the far side, almost hidden by the reflection of the trees. It was small, dark, and drifting slowly. It could have been a log, but it didn't move like one. It turned, then sank, disappearing beneath the surface. When night came, I locked the doors and windows and left the lights on. The air felt heavier than before, like the house was holding its breath along with me. Around 3 a.m., I heard a dull thud from outside, then another closer, like something hitting the side of the house. My heart was pounding. I didn't move, just sat there frozen, listening. The sound stopped. Then I heard faint splashing again, moving away from the shore. When I finally looked outside in the morning, the first thing I saw was a muddy handprint on the window by the door. It was small, maybe the size of a child's, but the fingers were long. The mud was fresh. I stared at it for a long time before wiping it away with a towel, even though part of me didn't want to touch it at all. I told myself I'd leave that day. I packed my things and started loading the car, but before I left, I decided to take one last look at the lake. The surface was calm again, perfectly smooth. The morning mist was rising off it in thin sheets. I walked down to the dock, just to see if the boat had drifted back. It hadn't, but I noticed something caught between two of the planks. A piece of fabric, small and dark. Pulled it out. It was soaked, heavy, and smelled like lake water mixed with something sour. When I looked closer, I realized it was part of a sleeve, torn from a jacket. That was enough. I threw it aside, got in my car, and drove out of there without looking back. The road through the woods felt longer than before, the trees closing in tighter. When I reached the main highway, I felt a huge wave of relief, like I'd finally escaped something that had been following me. 2 days after I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the place. I searched online for information about the lake. Most of it was old fishing reports and camping guides, but buried in a local newspaper archive, I found a short article from about 12 years ago. It said a man had gone missing near that same lake. They'd found his empty boat drifting near the dock of a private cabin. His jacket was found torn on one of the posts. The article said the lake was deep and cold, and that divers never found the body. I stopped reading after that. I didn't need to know more. I deleted the owner's number from my phone and didn't tell anyone about what happened. But sometimes at night, when the house is quiet, I'll hear a faint dripping sound, like water hitting wood. It always comes from near the window, and every time I look out, I half expect to see the still surface of that lake, dark and endless, waiting for me to step closer. I rented a lake house for a weekend because I needed to get away from everything. It was early fall, the kind of weather where the mornings are cold enough to see your breath, but the afternoons are still warm enough to sit outside in a hoodie. The listing showed a quiet cabin at the edge of a lake surrounded by thick pine trees, with no other homes in sight. That kind of isolation sounded perfect to me at the time. I had been working non-stop for months and wanted somewhere to shut out the world. The drive there took longer than I expected. The last 20 minutes were on a narrow dirt road that wound through tall trees and rocky patches. The further I drove, the weaker my cell signal got until it completely disappeared. The trees were so dense they blocked most of the sky, and the road twisted sharply around hills and dips. When I finally reached the cabin, the air felt colder, even though the sun was still out. The house sat about 30 feet from the water, and the lake looked still and black, reflecting the clouds above it. There was a small wooden dock with a metal ladder, half rusted, and a single old canoe tied to it. The cabin itself was small, just a single floor with a slanted roof. The exterior would look weathered and gray, the kind that had been there for decades. The front door creaked when I opened it, and the air inside smelled faintly of damp wood and old dust. It wasn't dirty, but it felt like no one had stayed there for a long time. The furniture was simple. One couch, a coffee table, a few chairs, and a small kitchen tucked into the corner. The back wall had a large glass sliding door that opened up to the deck facing the lake. After bringing in my bags, I walked outside and stood on the deck. The lake was almost silent except for an occasional ripple near the far end. There were no boats, no people, not even the sound of insects. It was so quiet that I could hear the faint clicking sound of the dock's rope rubbing against its post. I thought I would find the stillness relaxing, but something about it made me uneasy. Maybe it was just the isolation. That first night, I cooked some food and sat by the sliding door with the lights off, looking out over the dark water. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and every now and then, a faint breeze would move across the lake, making tiny waves catch the light. The longer I stared, the more I started thinking about how big that lake really was, how deep it might go, and how it looked completely different at night, like an endless pit of dark water. I went to bed around midnight. The bedroom window faced the lake, and I could see faint reflections of the moonlight moving across the ceiling. I left the window open a bit for air, but the sound of the water kept me half awake. Every so often, I thought I heard splashes, small ones, like someone stepping into the shallow edge or something heavy dropping in. I tried to tell myself it was fish or maybe a branch falling in, but the splashes sounded too irregular for that. The next morning was gray and overcast. I made coffee and sat on the dock. The air was colder, and a low mist clung to the surface of the lake. I noticed footprints in the damp dirt near the edge of the dock. They weren't mine. They were wider, heavier, like from work boots. They led from the waterline up to the path that wrapped around the side of the cabin. The dirt was soft, so they couldn't have been old, maybe from the night before. I looked around, but there was no one. I followed the tracks a little, but they just faded out in the leaves near the trees. I tried not to overthink it and convinced myself they might have been from whoever maintained the property. Later that day, I decided to walk around the lake. The air was quiet and heavy. The path was narrow and overgrown with weeds. It took about an hour to circle halfway around, and the whole time, I didn't see a single other person or house. On the far side, I found an old wooden shed near the waterline. The door was half open, hanging crooked. Inside, there were some rusted fishing rods, an empty gas can, and a pile of tangled nets that smelled like mold. The whole place looked abandoned for years. When I got back to the cabin, the mist had started to thicken again. I made something to eat and spent the evening reading, trying not to think too much about the footprints. Around sunset, I noticed the canoe wasn't tied where it had been. It was still there, but the rope was untied and hanging loose in the water. The canoe had drifted a few feet from the dock. I didn't remember touching it, and there hadn't been any wind strong enough to move it. I pulled it back, tied the rope tighter, and went inside. That night was worse. Couldn't sleep at all. Around 1 a.m., I heard something outside. It wasn't the random creaks or sounds of the water anymore. It was footsteps on the deck. Slow, heavy steps. The boards creaked softly, then went quiet. I stayed completely still in bed, staring toward the window, but I couldn't see anything from that angle. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. After maybe a minute, the sound moved away like whoever or whatever. It was walked down the steps toward the dock. Then there was a faint sound of water, like something being dragged. I wanted to get up and check, but fear pinned me down. After a few minutes, the sound stopped completely. I sat there awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening for anything. When the sun finally came up, I went outside. The deck boards near the sliding door had muddy footprints on them. Same shape, same boot tread as the ones from before. They led down to the dock. The canoe was gone. I stood there staring at the empty space for a long time. The rope was untied again, just hanging loose in the water. I walked along the shore for a while, but there was no sign of the canoe or anyone else. The air smelled like wet wood and lake water. I started to feel like I wasn't supposed to be there, like someone had been coming back to this place even though it was supposed to be mine for the weekend. By afternoon, I decided I was leaving early. I packed everything, loaded my car, and went inside one last time to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. When I looked through the back window toward the lake, I froze. The canoe was back, floating near the dock again. No one was in it, but it was sitting there perfectly still, tied to the post. I had been at the car the entire time before that, and there was no way someone could have quietly brought it back without me noticing. I didn't go back to untie it or look closer. I just locked the door, got in the car, and started driving. The dirt road felt even longer this time, every turn stretching out forever. My hands were shaking the whole drive. When I got to the nearest town with cell service, I stopped at a gas station and looked up the lake's name. I found an old local article from about 10 years ago. It mentioned a man who had gone missing while staying at one of the lake houses. He had been out in a canoe early one morning, and when the boat was found, it was empty, still tied to the dock. They never found him. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but something about that lake didn't feel right. It wasn't about the story I'd read. It was about the way it all felt while I was there. The silence, the footprints, the sense that someone else was always close by, watching. I never told anyone the details of what happened. I just said I left early because I didn't feel well. But every now and then, when I drive at night and see water on the side of the road, I think about that lake house. I think about the footprints, the canoe moving on its own, and the way that cold air felt against my skin, like something standing too close. And I still wonder if whoever was out there that night ever left, or if they're still walking those woods, waiting for someone else to come stay by the lake.